Okay, well, this will probably be the last 1950T video. Well, probably until next weekend, because by next weekend I should have all the parts I need to put the 3-speed back together, hopefully. But with that being said, I'm going to continue on with tearing it down and inspecting parts and whatnot. So I'm going to start here with the input shaft and the support bearing. I need to pull this apart so that we can check the bearing, make sure it's in good shape. And then you got to pull out this pilot bearing because there's an oil seal behind it that you got to replace. So, but we got to pull this ring of bolts out, and then that'll let us get everything apart. And that O-ring's junk. Looks like gonna want to be replacing them washers. Because they got no teeth left on them. So you got that big bearing there, and then you got another oil seal right here that's got to be replaced. Again, very rarely are you going to see anybody replacing these bearings because it's not very often that they go out. Although that's concerning. Oh boy, we might be into replacing this input shaft. Because that bearing is supposed to be press fit. And I can turn the race on the shaft. I hate this style of snap ring. I use them because they're stronger, but they're just a bitch to get a hold of. There we go. That's not good. That being said, let's do some miking here. Might be able to save it with some bearing retaining compound, as long as it's not too rough. Because these input shafts are not cheap. tight enough that it will try to bind rather than just slipping off. What? On the upside, it's not all chewed up. Normally on this bearing, you got to get a bearing splitter out and actually press the shaft out of the bearing. It's supposed to be an interference fit. It shouldn't just come off like that. Okay, so I got everything cleaned up here so we can mic it. So the shaft's measuring about 2 inches. $361.5. And the bearing. Is measuring about 2 inches. Three. Son of a bitch. Okay, let's try this again. I got all screwed up there. Everybody walking in the door and phone calls and yada yada yada. A little too steep there. Okay, so the bearing is measuring roughly 2 inches, 365. Try that in one more spot. Two inches, 364. Two inches, 361.5. The shaft is sticking pretty solid to that 2 inches, 361.5. 2 inches 364 and a half. So it's between 2 inches 364 and 2 inches 365. And I'm going to guess the inner race of the bearings got a little wear. I'm going to guess the shaft's got a little wear. So at the very least, I think I might replace this bearing. I don't know. I'm going to consult Dad real quick. But I'm probably at least going to replace that bearing just because it's obviously taking a whooping. Because I guarantee you this whole thing is because the jackass that rebuilt this thing at the dealer, and they're not in business anymore, so I'm not supposed to tell you, the dealer was Wyatt Farm Supply in Wyatt, Indiana. And I don't get how they fucked this up so bad, because it's not like they were a little Oliver dealer. Back in the day, they were a pretty big dealer, and even to this day, if you drive around down there, there's still Oliver and White shit all over the place. So I don't know how they, as a dealer, could have fucked this up this bad. This whole tractor. So, as far as I know, though, the only thing that they were into on it has been the engine and the 3-speed. So hopefully the screwed up stuff stops there, but Lord only knows. But I'm going to talk to Dad real quick about this whole thing right here. Well, the good news is this is fixable without any machine work or grinding or spray welding or anything like that. So we went and looked up the spec sheet for this bearing, and the bearing is supposed to measure 2 inches 362. So the bearing has almost 3 thou wear in it. The shaft has about a half a thou, so the bearing took it a lot harder than the shaft did. So a new bearing and some bearing retaining compound will fix this without having to spray weld and grind the shaft. And the problem that you will talk to, that a lot of guys that rebuild these things and actually like get into machining the shafts and whatnot, is the way that these things were hardened and heat treated is you start spray welding on them and it turns them into a noodle, and you may very well warp that shaft, and then you got to find somebody that can straighten it and all that, and that whole 9 yards, and you're going down a very, very expensive road. So if a new bearing and some bearing retaining compound will fix it, which it will very easily fix it, I'll take that. So that bearing's junk. But I'd rather replace a bearing than a shaft, because if I remember right, that's like $110 or $120 bearing versus, I think that shaft was right around $1,000 for a used one. So, yeah. I was hoping to be able to reassemble some of this, but doesn't look like it's going to turn out that way. I got the seal pressed out of there, or pulled out of there. I was going to put that back in, but shit, if I can't put anything back together, it's safer in the box, so I might as well not put anything back together right now. So, I guess we're pretty much done with this for now. Just had to tear it apart, clean it up, and measure everything. I do need... I guess I should see if I can get this bearing pulled out without hurting it. And because we gotta get that seal out of the center of here. That's the seal that keeps oil from running down the PTO shaft. All right, I got that pilot bearing knocked out. I don't like the way it feels, and chances are, it's basically the way it sits in that shaft. You got your bearing here, and this one basically sits right about here. So chances are this one took the same beating this one did, so we're just going to replace both of those to be safe. So now, got to get the side cover apart so we can clean it up. So, first things first, you got to get the pump off. And this should be doweled, and there is a gasket. So Sometimes it's a little bit of a fight. Oh, it's not doweled. I could have swore it was. No floaties in the gears, but we'll tear that down all the way here in a little bit. So there's that. And then we got to get the valve spool out, and to do that, you pull this plug, and this plug is what holds the detent ball and everything in. If I'm remembering right. Hopefully it comes out. Some of these pipe plugs on this thing I've not been having a good time with. Okay, different wrench set because I ain't gonna get anything with that little guy. Oh, fuck. Okay, do we have one that's in a little better shape? Because we don't want to round that thing off. Well, I guess we're going to take this little shorty with a cheater bar. Okay. We don't want to do a whole lot of super duper heating, but maybe. Hopefully I don't got to get the big torch. It's hard to believe that a plug that small can be that stuck. Alright, I ended up having to get a, I guess it's a 6mm? No, I had to get a 5mm wrench because the hole was starting to get ate out, and then I had to get the big torch out and pour some heat into it, and now it's coming right out, so I'm gonna have to put a different plug in it. So there's the plug, and that will be your detent spring. And then if you flip the cover up, there's the detent ball. And you want to make sure not to lose that. And then with all that out, you should be able to hook onto the shift spool with a pair of pliers. And it comes right out. And this spool seals up with an O-ring, so that's why you got to get this out. And then these are your shift detents, and then these are obviously your shift landings. So there's that. Spool bore looks good, and spool looks good. And then we got to get this plug out, and this is your this is what traps the pressure detent spring and check ball in there. The easiest thing to do when you put it back in, you want to use a wrench, but to get it out, just use an impact. At least to break it loose. You're gonna get stuff springing a thing out at you, so you just gotta be aware of that so you don't get a face full of parts and then you lose them everywhere. Well, that plug, and then a spring, and then there should be a plunger back in there, as long as it wants to come out. That's what regulates the clutch or the clutch lube pressure in there. And that is shimmable, so if you need to increase your pressure, you can buy a shim pack or a shim set to go in there. And I can't remember how many thou is supposed to increase it by. It tells you in the book, put X amount or put X thousandths of a spacer in there, and it'll bring it up 1 or 2 psi or whatever the hell it is. And then once that's out, you got a plug here. That should just, I can't remember if there's anything important back behind this one or not, or if it's just a machine or a machine drilling. We're gonna need the clamps again. Bigger ratchet. Possibly heat. There we go. Yep, there's another spool back here. So you got a spacer, and then a spring. There it is. And then that guy. And I just want to confirm real quick, so I know I'm telling you right. Give me one second here. Okay, I just wanted to confirm what I was right and what I was telling you. In the upper spring and spool is the pressure regulator, and then the bottom one is the pressure bypass. So I was telling you right. So with all that out, the last thing you got is there's a pipe plug that goes right here. The only thing that is plugging a construction drilling so that they could get in here during the machining process. And I think, if I remember correctly, this is also doubles as a pressure test port, if I remember right. So with all that out, you are good. I mean, that's basically the extent of what's in the side cover. You got 2 springs, 2 spools, 3 plugs, 4 plugs if you count the one that's holding the detent ball and spring in, and the pump, which we'll get to the pump here in a second. But that's it. That's your pile of parts that are in the valve cover. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this cleaned up, get the gasket scraped off, all that. We'll get the bench cleaned up, and then we'll hit the oil pump. Okay, so I put the guts back in the pump, except for the pressure regulator spring. It gives a free length in the book for this, and this one is an 1/8 inch a full 1/8 inch too short. So we're gonna replace that. Because you don't know, is it just the wrong spring? Because it's got freaking grind marks on it that really shouldn't be there. I don't know. The way everything else is, the bypass spring was good, but this one not so much. So I'm just going to buy these, or replace this spring. They're cheap. Honestly, I do not know why AGCO just does not put these two springs, actually this spring, and that spring. I don't know why they don't put all these springs in the overhaul kit for these, because they're cheap. It's just good insurance to replace them. But anyway, we're going to do that one. The kit comes with a new crush washer for this plug. So I got that on there. That plug's just hand tight. And then I got the valve spool in with the new O-ring. When you put one of these in, do not try to work it like right now, just the way it is. Do not try to like grab onto it with a pair of pliers and work it, because it is the same diameter all the way across all the landings, so you can yank it right back out and have the detent ball fall and go wherever. The geometry and the stops are built into the lever. So once you put the cover back on and get the 3-speed bolted back together, you can work it with the lever and make sure everything's good. But like, if you really want to test, if you really want to make sure everything's good, just grab onto it with a pair of pliers. There's like no resistance there. Everything's good. And if you ever put one of these in and they got a lot of drag to them, A, check the landings for any nick marks. And B, I have seen these get bent before. I'm not sure how common it is, but like the one on my 1955, when we got it, the lever had a lot of, you had to like, right now, when you shift one of these things, you should be able to take one finger, flick that lever, and once you get over center on the detent ball should finish shifting it, and it should take over the lever and pull it into the next shift for you. My 1955, you had to grab the lever and you couldn't feel the detent, so you had to wait for the shift. Well, it's because that spool, how it happened, I don't know, because the thing only comes out of there like, what, yay far, but they had bent the spool like in the center, and it was dragging, and really the only way to check it is you got to get it on a flat bench and roll it and look for the high spots. But that's just something to look for if you feel a lot of drag in that spool. But this one was fine. So anyway, the side cover is back together for the most part, other than that spring. So now onto the pump. And for this, I'm going to need some snap ring pliers. And the smaller than that. We're going to need these guys. And they're going to have to be switched. And you take this here snap ring off. And then this gear lifts off. You want to make sure not to lose this key. There's a little baby Woodruff key in there. And you can take this other snap ring off. I'll have to look. I can't remember if the kit comes. I'm pretty sure the kit comes with new snap rings for this, so I'm gonna have to look. And then you can take the sump screen off, because this is about the simplest form of a hydraulic pump you can get. The suction is literally built in or machined into the center casting. It sucks out of here, and then that's your pressure port. It's super duper simple. and then it filters before it returns to tank. And now I need a 9/16 socket. And then, just like almost everything else, this thing is doweled. So getting it apart, you got pins here, or pins top and bottom, and they go clean through. So getting this thing apart is sometimes a little bit of a bear. But sometimes you can get lucky. You don't want to whack on that super hard, so if it's not coming apart, don't keep wailing on it. But sometimes if you tap the input shaft, it will get you started enough to pry this thing apart. And I got one dowel pin that wants to come with this whole side of the housing, which is neat. There we go. And there's that. So I'll clean this up. And I do believe the book gives you, I can check right now actually, I believe the book gives you a running tolerance for those shafts. Oh, it gives you a shaft diameter, so that's easy. You don't got to figure out a running tolerance, you just measure the shaft. Which that whole pump is submerged in oil all the time, so generally you don't see a whole lot of wear in them. But the shaft diameter should be 625 to 662.47, and it gives you a width for the gears. So I'll clean this stuff up, get the oil off of it, and we'll do some miking. Well, so far there's not been a single assembly on this tractor that I have found that hasn't been fucked up by somebody at some point. So I couldn't figure out why this shaft is supposed to be one diameter all the way out, and I couldn't figure out why it wouldn't just pull out of the side plate. I had to push on it. It wasn't hard, but I had to push on it. And I got it cleaned up, and I saw this. So apparently at some point the gear was running loose on the well, there's some things here that don't make sense, because this side of the shaft is screwed up and this side of the shaft is perfectly fine, but this one's full of punch pricks. Like, at some point, somehow, for some reason, the drive sprocket was running loose on the shaft, and they pin pricked it to make it fit tighter, and then they cleaned the pin pricks up, and I don't know what they got going on here, but the weird part is there is no visible damage to the bore on the sprocket, and there's no damage to the woodruff key. Just that shaft, and the sprockets are fine. I mean, everything about this pump appears to be perfect. The side plates are nice and smooth. When you inspect these things, you want to check the side plates, make sure they're still flat, make sure there's no wear, because when these things build pressure, they'll try to thrust because there's nowhere else for them to go. They'll try to push the sprocket, or they'll try to push the pump gears apart or into the side of the pump. So sometimes you'll find, not just on these pumps, but gear pumps in general, more advanced gear pumps that are made for higher pressure and fancier things will actually have wear plates that are replaceable in the sides of the pump. This is just a cheapie. It was built for low pressure to do one job, so it's not that high tech, but you check and make sure the side plates aren't wore from thrust forces pushing the gears into the side of the pump and whatnot. So, I mean, everything about this pump is perfect except for that. And if I'm here, I don't really want to put it back together like that, but we have a 2-speed down in the barn that came out of the 1600 when I first bought it that was junk, wouldn't build pressure. And the first generation 2-speeds, for some reason, somebody thought it was a good idea to put a soft bypass valve seat in it, and they would erode away and they're not replaceable. So the only way to fix it is to just basically, you have to replace you don't have to junk the 2-speed, but you got to replace the whole side cover with a newer side cover. And at the time it happened, there was a guy at Maybaugh that had just updated a 1650 to a 3-speed. So we bought an entire good 2-speed for the 1600 for $600. So it's like, we just did it. After he just went through and put a bunch of work into it. So, long story short, we got a junk 2-speed down in the barn, and they use the same pump. So I'm going to probably pull the pump out of that and see what kind of shape it's in, and either A, just replace the shaft because the shaft presses out of that gear, or B, if the pump's in good shape, just use the whole pump. So I'm gonna go probably get that apart, and we'll get it up here and see what we got. Okay, so this is that 2-speed pump. It's in better shape. Everything on it mics out within spec. The shafts are on the lower end, but you'd expect that kind of wear on a pump this old. So I don't see any reason to not use it. The only thing you got to do is the 2-speed uses a smaller drive gear than the 3-speed, so we got to use the 3-speed drive gear. Also, this is the normal sump screen that I've seen at every one of these I've had apart. I'm pretty sure this thing is some homemade deal. The holes in it are bigger. Yeah. So this is what the sump screen should look like. So, with all that being said, this is good to go back together. Everything, like I say, everything mics out good, so give her a little bit of lube. It'll be submerged in oil the minute you fill it, so all this is going to end up wet before you even roll it over, but still better to be safe than sorry. The only thing I found on this pump was the key slot has a slight chip in it, but I test fit the sprocket with the good Woodruff key out of the other pump, and it fit tight, so we're gonna run it. But it's nice and smooth, and it always ran, it had ATF, so you know it was clean. Oops. That's smooth as silk, so and those washers are junk. So we're gonna put it together with regular locks, because honestly, I trust lock washers more than I trust these fucking internal tooth or external tooth tin washers. So I'm gonna go grab me some lock washers real quick. Okay, and they're very adamant in the book that when you assemble this, the heads of the bolts go on the drive gear side so that you don't have any clearance issues. So once all that's assembled, you can put your gear back on. And the rebuild kit did come with new snap rings, so you got that. And then we want the good Woodruff key. And then the gear. And it spit the key back out. Stay in there, you bastard. And then your last snap ring, and you're good to go. So, there's that. Okay, so now that everything's pretty much disassembled, all we got is some parts to inspect. First thing they give you is a dimension for these direct clutch piston return springs, and they want a free length of 1.32 inches. So it would appear, you know, these things are kind of hard to measure because they're not necessarily flat. That one's flat. Wondering if we ought to just be replacing these too. They can't be that expensive. And they're all undersized. So I'm thinking that we're going to be replacing these springs just to be safe. Because they're all measuring between 1.29 and 1.30-ish. So they're all collapsed, which is something you'd expect out of springs that old. Just holding them, you can see they're all different lengths. So I think we're going to get new ones of those. And they give you a dimension for this thrust washer, but I'm replacing it, so don't care. And the next thing we need to check is the outer race for the sprag clutch. And on that they want outer race, they want 2 inches 614 to 2 inches 613. And we are at 2 inches 614, right on the money. So there is no wear in that whatsoever, which is pretty amazing. So we're good there. And we need to check the inner diameter of the sprag clutch race, which is on the output shaft right here. And there's two diameters here. There's the smaller diameter that the sprag clutch rides on, and then right here's a larger diameter that a carrier needle bearings rides on. So this is the one you got to measure. And for this one, they want, I think I'm going to need a different mic. Inner race diameter, yeah, I need a 1 to 2 inch mic for that. For that one, they want 1 inch 9578 to 1 inch 9573. They're awful damn specific on that one. And we are at 1 inch 95. Five, 6, 7. That's probably right at the bottom end, but we are still within spec there. It's just, you probably can't see that on camera. It's just a tick over 1 inch 957. So 9573. I'm gonna guess that's probably about what that is. It might be just a tad on the bottom. Right there, it measured a little thin. Right there, it's... So I'm going to go ahead and say that we are good there. It's not worn enough to warrant considering replacing the shaft. And it's not like these shafts are a dime a dozen. Because some of these numbers, you got to take them with a grain of salt. Because they are giving you all this. And back in the day, this shaft might have been, somewhere between 50 and $100 to replace, where now you're looking at north of probably $1,000 to replace it. So you got to take a lot of these numbers with a grain of salt, and you have to make some sacrifices as to what's practical to replace now versus what's runnable, and this is very runnable. I do not know if they give... This would be output shaft gear. Now, the one thing that I don't like about the way they did this book, and I guess I'm thinking it from a farmer's perspective, is I would say I would give it categories. Output shaft. Output shaft. List all of the measurable journals with dimensions for the output shaft, and then say sprag clutch, and then all of that, and then yada yada yada, and go down the line, rather than individually listing off everything, and then you got to go hunting and pecking to see what's got measurable dimensions and what doesn't. But I'm not seeing one for this bearing journal. But it's a needle bearing, and I see no spalling or any kind there whatsoever, so it's probably safe to say that we're good here. And the other thing that they give you a dimension for, make sure this thing doesn't walk off on me, is this plate. So we're going to want to check that and make sure everything's still kosher, and make sure it's even the right damn plate. So that would be... What would that be? That would be thrust plate. Direct drive plate thickness, pressure plate thickness, 209 to 205. So we need a different mic for that one. Which, that being said, because this is actually measuring really damn thick. Pressure plate thickness 209 to 205, and this is measuring not quite 250, about 249. So I'm wondering if on this older style of clutch housing, if the pressure plate is thicker. Because none of these plate dimensions are anywhere close to that thick. $249. Piston, thrust washer. Huh. And without the book that would cover the older style of 3-speeds, basically I would probably have to have a 1950T book. But I guess I can't get that dimension without the older book, but I don't see anything wrong with that thrust plate. And we're going to replace this here thrust washer too. And every thrust washer in here, I'm replacing it. So but as far as measurements go, that's really the important stuff right there, especially the measurements that revolve around the sprag. So yeah, everything else in here is just stuff that would have been important and reasonable to check back when this thing was new and parts were cheap and plentiful, but now a lot of this stuff you do a visual inspection on, and with the known history of the fact that this thing ran and shifted and worked fine, you just take some of it with a grain of salt and say, we're just going to put it back together. We know it worked. So, yeah, with all that being said, I think we're pretty much done with the disassembly and the inspection. Alright, sorry about that. Camera battery died and I forgot where I left off, but I was just about ready to wrap up anyway. So, we're all squared away. Everything's clean, inspected. We found all the major hiccups. I have my whole list of parts I gotta get between the engine and the 3-speed, so gotta go in and get on parts book and look up some more part numbers. So with all that being said, I guess the entire disassembly ordeal is, as far as I know, finally over. So anything from here on is going to be going back together. So I guess with that being said, that's it for this one. We'll catch you guys on the next one.